Gabor Lukacs is an airline passenger rights activist. He has been lobbying for years now to try to get better compensation for Canadian passengers when the airlines fall short in their service. He joins us now by Skype from Halifax. Mr. Lukacs, thank you very much for taking the time.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
First and foremost, I guess, having lobbied so hard and so long about about compensation, what do you make of this latest tranche of regulations that were announced today and come into effect on Sunday?
These regulations are a great disappointment for Canadian travelers. They are a step backwards. Instead of improving rights, they are making things worse.
How can that be? I mean, we have the minister saying that this is a massive step forward, and these are fines that didn't exist before, and now Canadians can have fines for delays.
The minister is not telling the public the truth. When it comes to fining airlines, the fines have existed for at least a decade. When it comes to compensation to passengers, under the new rules, passengers will see no compensation whatsoever in the most common cases of flight delays and cancellations. These are delays and cancellations caused by weather and when the aircraft breaks down, maintenance issues.
Okay.
Under the rules the minister claims to be world class, there's no compensation. If you compare that with the gold standard of passenger protection, which is the European Union's regime, there, if the aircraft breaks down, and as a result you don't get to your destination, the airline has to compensate you.
Okay, because the minister is saying that they cannot penalize airlines for things like weather, and I think you'd agree with that, but they also cannot...
I would assert I have no qualm with the weather aspect, although I would know that in Europe, even if the delay or cancellation is due to weather, the airline still has to provide you with accommodation and meals.
But with regards to safety, he says we also shouldn't be penalizing the airlines with regards to technical difficulties that are discovered in non-routine maintenance, because that is then a serious difficulty, must be remedied, and that's beyond their control. There's this phrase, things not fully in their control.
No, this is a bogus statement and misrepresents what is in the law. The law recognizes that maintenance issues are the airline's full responsibility. Actually, that is part of the aviation laws applicable to airlines. It is also part of the new regulations. But they say that nevertheless, when it is maintenance issue, the airline is off the hook, which makes no sense. In the European Union, the airlines do have to pay compensation in these cases, and it actually motivates airlines to repair problems with aircraft at the earliest possible opportunity instead of leaving them to the very last day on which the problem can be repaired. The minister appears to implicitly acknowledge that he cannot actually force airlines to fly safely.
Okay, so you're saying...
Flying a safe aircraft is a legal obligation.
Mm-hmm.
If the minister is telling the Canadian public that he cannot ensure that airlines will fly safely unless the airlines don't have to pay compensation when the aircraft breaks down, then clearly he admits his own incompetence and inability to ensure that his department works as it's supposed to be.
So what you're saying is, or are you maintaining, that the majority of delays will fall into the category of either weather created or created by technical difficulties, which the airlines will then be able to claim is a safety issue and a technical difficulty, which gets them off the hook?
I'm saying something actually a bit more. It's correct that the airlines will blame weather and maintenance issues, unverifiable maintenance issues, for virtually everything. And as a passenger, you don't have a way of really knowing what happened. Weather you could perhaps verify, but maintenance, you don't have access to the airline's own documents, to the aircraft logbooks. And that's also something in which the Canadian regulations are substandard. In Europe, it is the airline that has to prove that there were extraordinary circumstances, such as snowstorm, volcanic eruption, act of terrorism. You as the passenger don't have the burden of proof. While under the Canadian rules, you will be expected to demonstrate that it was the airline that was responsible and that it was not maintenance issues. How do you prove a negative?
So what
one of the most basic legal principles is that you cannot prove a negative in most cases.
So what you're saying is, I mean, you're forecasting then that the majority of these delays will not qualify for any sort of compensation?
We anticipate in the vast majority of the cases, passengers will see no compensation at all. The only cases where passenger will get compensation is when the media gets on the case and the court of public opinion forces the airline to grudgingly pay up anyway.
So if these loopholes are so egregious and so major in terms of compensating for delays, and we're talking only about the delays here, what should Canadians do?
Delays and cancellations.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, if you travel internationally, you still have the Carriage by Air Act, which the airlines like to forget about. You still have the European Union's gold standards if you fly from the European Union or if you fly into Europe on a European carrier. So one suggestion immediately for Canadian passengers is fly on European airlines. Make sure that the actual airline operating your flight is a European carrier, because then you are protected even when you fly from Canada to Europe. In other words, avoid flying on Canadian airlines.
Okay, another question and another point that the minister made at his press conference today, and he says, okay, we can take issue with one or another of these measures, but he says if you take, this is Marc Garneau speaking, if you take the whole of Canada's measures that were announced both in the spring and now, coming into effect this weekend, if you take the measures that were announced in terms of lost or damaged luggage, if you take the measures that were in terms of delays on the tarmac, which he says the Europeans don't have, if you take the measures of keeping families together on flights, he says that the Canadian system is actually more generous and more comprehensive than even the European system.
Minister Garneau is being dishonest with the public. When it comes to baggage delay, damage, or loss, the European Union has had those in place for well over a decade, as did Canada since 2003 for international travel. The European Union took the Montreal Convention, which has been in place since 2003 for baggage, and adopted it as its domestic law. So when it comes to baggage, Canada is not better than the European Union. Let's talk about tarmac delays. It's a North American problem. In Europe, you don't hear about airlines keeping passengers for 5 or 6 or 7 hours on the tarmac. So you may complain that you cannot get snow tires in Africa, but typically don't have snow in Africa. So the tarmac delay problem is a North American problem, and therefore in Canada we need to deal with it because airlines don't have enough common sense to deal with it on their own. When you come to seating of children, it is also being dealt in Europe largely by common sense. I would add that the minister is again being dishonest, because the rules about seating of children have been in place since December 31st, 2014 for major Canadian airlines. And actually, some aspects of the new rules for seating of children is a step backwards compared to the existing rules for Air Canada.
Okay, well, Gabor Lukacs, I want to thank you very much for speaking with us. I know a lot of Canadians will be watching with great interest as we enter the most intense travel season as we go into the holiday season. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much for having me.